Welcome back to CNN's breaking news coverage of President Trump's address. We just heard it to senior U.S. military officers at the Marine base at Quantico, Virginia.
Let's go live now to CNN senior reporter Daniel Dale for a fact check. All right, Daniel, what stood out to you?
There were just so many false claims, and I say that after essentially every speech, unfortunately, from President Donald Trump, but I think this is notable because of the audience. He was telling a lot of lies, saying a lot of other inaccurate things, regardless of his intentions, to the U.S.'s top military leaders. So I want you to listen to something he said about former President Joe Biden and Biden's comments about the U.S. military.
I go around bragging about that. I said, we have the strongest military anywhere in the world. I say it. You never heard Biden say that. Never heard him say anything. But you never heard him say, did you ever hear him say, we have the strongest military? He doesn't say that. I say it.
Hello guys, Adam is here. This is the moment Donald Trump has spent his entire political career believing could never happen. This is the nightmare scenario he probably dismissed as impossible. This is the public, undeniable, televised proof that his grip on his own movement has completely shattered.
President Biden said that over and over. This took me about 5 seconds to find on Google. One sample quote from 2023. Our U.S. military, and this is not hyperbole, I've said it for the last 2 years, is the strongest military in the history of the world, not just the strongest in the world, in the history of the world. So this is just one of many such quotes from President Biden.
On February 5th, 2026, Donald Trump walked onto the stage at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, the single most important annual gathering of conservative activists in America, his home turf, his loyalist stronghold, the place where he usually receives standing ovations before he even opens his mouth, and within minutes the crowd started turning on him. They groaned, they booed, they chanted, "No more taxes," directly at the President of the United States.
And he made another false claim about President Biden and the military, falsely claiming at another point in the speech today that President Biden had suggested early in this term that he could get rid of the Space Force established under President Trump. Listen to that quote.
The Space Force turned out to be a very important thing. I said from the beginning, you know, when Biden came into office, he wanted to terminate it. He said, and this thing called Space Force, so we could get rid of that. And he got hammered by the people in this room for even suggesting it, because it's very important.
President Biden never said that. President Biden never said that.
And then 2,000 people, 2,000 of his supposed most devoted supporters, stood up from their seats and walked out while Trump was still speaking. Not after the speech, not during the next speaker, during Trump's speech. While the man himself was at the podium defending his economic record, trying to sell his 20% universal tariffs as a success story, 2,000 conservatives decided they had heard enough. They decided they didn't believe him anymore. They decided they didn't want to be in the same room with him. And they left, in front of the cameras, in front of the press, in front of everyone watching at home. It was, without exaggeration, one of the most humiliating public moments any sitting president has ever experienced. And the worst part for Trump? It was entirely his own supporters who delivered the humiliation. Let's rewind and understand the full scope of this disaster because the context makes it even more devastating. CPAC attendance in 2026 was already down 35% from the previous year. That's not a marginal dip. That's a collapse. 35% fewer conservative activists bothered to show up to the premier conservative event of the year. The energy was already gone. The enthusiasm was already depleted. And then Trump took the stage to defend the indefensible. He tried to sell his 20% universal tariffs as an economic victory. He tried to convince the room that these tariffs, which have crashed the stock market, erased $15 trillion in wealth, cost manufacturing jobs instead of creating them, and contributed directly to persistent inflation, were actually good policy. He stood there and asked his own base to believe something they know, from their own lived experience, is not true. And they rejected him. Not silently, not politely. They groaned. They booed. They chanted a direct rebuke of his tax policy, and then 2,000 of them got up and walked out. That's not a disagreement. That's a revolt. That's a public, organized, unmistakable signal that the Trump brand is no longer something conservatives are willing to defend. Now, consider who was in that room. These weren't swing voters. These weren't Democrats or independents who came to heckle. These were CPAC attendees. These were the people who still bother to go to conservative conferences in 2026, which already represents a self-selected group of the most politically engaged, most ideologically committed conservatives in the country. These are the true believers. The hardcore base. The people who have defended Trump through 2 impeachments, through January 6th, through countless scandals that would have destroyed any normal politician, and 2,000 of them walked out on him. The significance of this cannot be overstated. When the true believers start leaving, there's no one left to recruit. When the hardcore base starts booing, there's no enthusiasm to mobilize. When the people who still bother to attend CPAC decide they'd rather be anywhere else than listening to Trump speak, his political career is in cardiac arrest. What makes this even more damning is who confirmed it in real time. Laura Loomer, not exactly a never-Trump Republican, not exactly a secret anti-Trump operative. Laura Loomer, one of the most prominent MAGA influencers on the planet, tweeted during Trump's speech that he had lost the room. Laura Loomer, who has built her entire public persona around defending Trump against all critics, looked at what was happening on that stage and publicly acknowledged that her hero was failing. When Laura Loomer says Trump lost the room is not just lost, it's incinerated. And the snap polling from the event confirms exactly how bad it was. 62% of the people who stayed for Trump's speech disapproved of what he was saying. 62% disapproval at an event that exists specifically to showcase conservative politicians to conservative activists. That's not a narrow majority. That's a landslide rejection. Nearly 2 out of 3 conservatives in that room heard Trump's defense of his economic policies and said, "No, we don't agree with that. We don't support that. We don't believe you." And that was just the people who stayed. It doesn't count the 2,000 who had already walked out. Then there's the audio. Podium microphones picked up Trump muttering under his breath about disloyalty, complaining that people were walking out, expressing in real time his awareness that he was losing the crowd and his resentment at being abandoned by people he expected to support him. This is a president of the United States, standing at the podium of the most important conservative conference in the country, muttering bitterly about his own supporters abandoning him, and having those mutterings captured on live audio for the world to hear. There is no spin for that. There is no alternative explanation. There is no way to blame the media or Democrats or deep state saboteurs. The audio is Trump complaining that his own people are walking out on him, because they were. Because they did. Because 2,000 of them got up and left while he was still talking. Now connect this to everything else we've been tracking because the pattern is unmistakable and it's accelerating. The Fort Worth rally drew only 1,000 people in a 3,000-seat arena, 2/3 of the seats empty. The Rocky Mount rally saw attendance collapse from 6,000 to 1,000 in just 2 years. Trump's lawyers are quitting his criminal cases because they're unwinnable. His campaign team just resigned en masse. His cabinet is threatening to walk. His approval ratings among his own base are dropping. His rally crowds are evaporating. And now, at the signature conservative event of the year, on the stage where Trump has always been treated like a conquering hero, 2,000 of his supposed loyalists stood up and walked out while he was speaking. This is not a series of unrelated incidents. This is a systemic collapse. The foundation of Trump's political power has always been the perception that he has an unshakable, fanatically loyal base that will support him no matter what. That perception is now demonstrably false. The base is shaking. The base is fracturing. The base is walking out. The broken promises explain why. Trump promised his supporters $2,000 stimulus checks that never arrived. Trump promised that his tariffs would bring back manufacturing jobs. Instead, manufacturing jobs were lost. Trump promised he would fix inflation and lower costs. Instead, inflation persisted and costs remained high. Trump promised victory and strength and success. Instead, his presidency has delivered economic pain, legal chaos, and political collapse. His supporters are not stupid. They know when they've been sold a bill of goods. They know when the emperor has no clothes, and they are expressing that knowledge in the most direct way possible, by standing up and walking out while he's still talking. What does this mean for the 2026 midterms? It means everything. Voter turnout is the single most important factor in midterm elections. The party that energizes its base wins. The party whose supporters stay home loses. And right now, Donald Trump is not just failing to energize his base. He's actively repelling them. He's making them walk out of his speeches. He's making them boo his policies. He's making them chant no more taxes at his own economic defense. How is that same base supposed to be motivated to show up and vote for Republican candidates in November? They're not. They're going to stay home. They're going to express their disappointment by disengaging. And when Republican voters stay home, Democrats win. It's that simple. What does this mean for Trump's political future? It means the fear that once protected him is evaporating. Republican politicians have spent years terrified of Trump's base. They've watched him primary opponents who crossed him. They've watched him destroy careers with a single tweet. They've operated under the assumption that crossing Trump meant political death. But that assumption only holds if Trump's base is actually loyal to Trump. And now we have definitive proof that it's not. 2,000 CPAC attendees walked out on him. 62% of the remaining audience disapproved of his speech. Laura Loomer tweeted that he lost the room. The fear is gone. The spell is broken. And every Republican politician watching this collapse is recalibrating their relationship with Trump in real time. The ones who were thinking about running in 2028 are now thinking about how to distance themselves. The ones who were defending him through scandal after scandal are now thinking about how to explain why they ever supported him at all. The ones who were afraid of his wrath are now realizing there might not be much wrath left to fear. What does this mean for Trump personally? It means the identity he spent a lifetime constructing, the winner, the strongman, the leader with unbreakable bonds to the common man, is disintegrating in public view. Trump has always defined himself in opposition to losers. Losing is the ultimate sin in his moral universe. Losing is what happens to other people, weak people, people who don't have what it takes. But Trump is losing now. He's losing crowds. He's losing staff. He's losing legal battles. He's losing political support. He's losing the one thing he believed could never be taken from him, the devotion of his base. And he knows it. The muttering about disloyalty captured on those podium microphones is the sound of a man watching his entire worldview collapse and realizing he has no way to stop it. 2,000 people walked out on Donald Trump at CPAC. 2,000 conservatives who used to cheer him now cannot stand to be in the same room. 2,000 supporters who once believed in him have decided they've heard enough. That's not a setback. That's not a rough patch. That's not a media narrative that will fade with the next news cycle. That's a permanent, irreversible rupture between Trump and the people who once made him politically invincible. And the midterms are coming.